programming for your squatting and pulling, I'll reference it a little bit to the loading of your snatch and clean and jerk. So there's two things you need to pay attention to. One is, how do I load? How do I peak for a squat? And then do I need to peak for a squat? And then when do I need to peak for that? How do I do it? So how you do it is actually very simple. So strength training, as simple as weightlifting is somewhat on paper, strength training is even more simple. It's high volume, lower intensity, and then they converge, meet in the middle, and then they go off in separate directions. So you start with your high volume weights, lower intensities, and then you're hoping to get for a 1 rep max, a single at the end. And this is how people from 100 kilo back squats to 450 kilo back squats get stronger. It's a very straightforward principle, but it takes a bit of practice. So doing that for squats, for example, works. But the real key for weightlifting is, when do you do it? When do you finish it in relation to your weightlifting? So this kind of loading parameter, while it looks pretty basic, it's pretty straightforward. So if we go back to our loading, if we take this as kind of our basic structure, when we want to peak for our squat, we kind of want to be peaking close to the end, but not at the same time. So when you're weightlifting, it's not always super easy to be exact when you'll peak your squat, because it depends on a couple of factors. You know, for powerlifting, for a competition, or generally strength training, we've less variables to us, or we're going to minimize those variables to make sure that we do peak on time. But for weightlifting, we're going to be a little bit more kind of fluid with our loading for our squatting, so that we give preference again back to the snatch and clean and jerk. So if we're maxing around week 14, we don't necessarily need to hit a PB, but we want our squat to be at its strongest around this time. Now we get a good few weeks leeway. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be right now, but pretty close to that end goal is when we want that squat to be pretty fresh. So there's a couple of ways of looking at this. You can look at, what do I want to hit now, and what do I need to squat to hit that? But you also need to think, okay, I'm doing this now, but I assume you want to hit more snatch and clean and jerk PBs in the future. So you need to be operating again with that long-term view in the mind and thinking, okay, so maybe I can snatch 100 kilos now. I want to snatch 110, for example. I'm back squatting 180. It's about where we'd like to see that in terms of, you'd probably want a bit more squat. So let's say you snatch 110 now, you still have 180. Then you want to snatch 120 next, for example, 115, 120. Suddenly you've got two jobs to do. You've got the job of trying to get better at weightlifting, but also adding 15, 20 kilos to your squat. Far better to be in a position where you're going to snatch 110 soon, but you're already at 200. So you've got lots of leeway, and you're not trying to push two things in a training block where you're thinking, fuck, my legs are really weak, and I need to get better at snatching, clean and jerking. So you need to be playing this game in your mind all the time, where you're trying to plan ahead. You're trying to be reasonable with your plans. You're trying to see, okay, is this the time when I can peak? But of course, you can't start your 10s in the back squat on week 12 of 14 you're snatching. You know, you're going to have no power. You're going to be really fatigued. You're probably going to get hurt. So you need to be smart when you balance this volume. You need to look at how well can you balance this. Are you the kind of person who can do triples in your back squat, but if you're doing 10s that same week, you're absolutely goosed. So you need to be smart. You may even need to spend a portion of the year going, okay, I have to take some time away from weightlifting. Like you were asking earlier about doing kind of bodybuilding and powerlifting and maintain your weightlifting. There is cases when that happens. In my view, that's a last ditch effort, or that's like plan C before we do that. It's very possible to push your back squat and your snatch and your front squat and your clean and jerk at the same time if the loading is smart. So I don't know if any of you run the kind of mainstream weightlifting program we have. A lot of people hit front squats and back squat PBs at the end with snatch, clean and jerk. So it is doable, but you just need to be really smart with how that loading is done. So there has been cases where, for someone trying to snatch 100 kilos, for example, you want to squat, we'll usually see an adult squatting somewhere between 160 to 180. Lower end, you might see a 150, but that's way too low. So let's say we're at that 150 kilos. You need to be thinking, okay, is it worth my while taking 3-4 months away from pushing the weightlifting like this and maintaining it and getting a head start. It's a worthwhile decision to make in some cases. I've definitely had lifters where we got a big head start on their back squat, we got an extra 10 kilos, but they've also built up all this capacity with squatting. Their volume is better, they understand squatting better. So then when they go back to this, they don't have to take a period out where they're going, oh, okay, I have to do another 4 months to get their squat going, because they've got a little bit of leeway now that they can... Who is it? Give it to me. Give me the phone. Gabriel, you of all people need to list about squats, all right? So you're in a position where you're thinking, okay, I've gotten a head start on my squat now, I don't need to take that big 3 or 4 months out from lifting. Because like we talked about, 3 or 4 months of good weightlifting programming doesn't come around that often. And if you got 3 or 4 months that would suit a squat, it probably would have suited some weightlifting. So then you're thinking, well, I'm wasting a lot of my valuable time throughout the year. So you need to be smart when you make these decisions, and you need to be smart with how you're pushing that loading. So there's also cases then where, let's say you're trying to snatch that 110, but you're already squatting 200. So I don't need you getting to here, for example, or getting to that 120 or 30 and trying to hit 210. You don't need to do that then. What you need there is a really fast and confident 180, a fast and confident 190, where you're like, my squat is still very close to 200, but I don't need to hit 200 right now. I don't need to go more. Maybe you're a really good squatter, and maybe you're like, yeah, I could smash 210 now without a huge amount of effort. So you kind of have to play to your own strengths. If you're a really good squatter and you can get better at squatting without minimal efforts, do play to that. You know, you're never going to get to a point where, you know, he missed his snatch because his legs were too strong. That doesn't happen, you know. No one's gone, his squat was too big, that's why he missed it. So do play to your own strengths in that regard. And if you find that you can push that squat no problem with snatching, clean and jerking, then I'd highly recommend you do that. But you need to be smart with how you're playing that with your squat. When it comes to pulls with weightlifting, always think of the pull as a technique exercise first and then a strength exercise second. So it is strengthening the areas you want, but all your pulls should be the exact same, or your deadlifts, or your snatch grip deadlifts with shrugs, or whatever, your clean grip deadlifts with shrugs. They should look the exact same as your lift from the floor. Think about pulls in weightlifting as extra technical practice. Think about them as extra repetitions of a certain portion of the lift. Do not think about pulls as numbers. Now, when you get to a certain stage, like really top ends, some lifters might, for example, if Anton was here, he'd talk about needing certain numbers to pull. Gabriel dictates his best clean and jerk, or what his predicted clean and jerk is based off his squat, and then he bases his pull based off what he squatted, and then he bases that on what he gets a certain percentage of that, and then that's what he can clean and jerk, or what he thinks he could clean and jerk. So in that case, you don't need to worry about that. For you guys, definitely, pulls are a way of getting an extra 30 reps of technique a week, maybe 40. So when we load pulls, let's say we're doing the snatching here, all I would do in pulls in this case, follow that same rep scheme, but just add a little bit of extra in front of that. So if we start with 5x3 at 70 in the snatch, we can do 5x3 at 75 or 80 kilos on the snatch pull. And then we just, in a minute, 2 minutes, let me finish first. So as you progress through, you just add on the weights, you just keep it ahead of you, and then when we get to the end, you can slow down with the loading. So if you get to, let's say you're 100 kilo snatch, you want to go for that 105, maybe the week before your single, you do a nice, easy single, you keep the loading low, you don't want to fatigue your back too much. So it's like another variation almost. Now it is strengthening the specific areas that you're looking for, so you have to be super diligent. Strength, of course, is general in some capacity, but there is joint-specific strength that we want to reproduce. We also don't want to get in the habit of doing really heavy pulls and then reinforcing a worse technique that carries over to our snatch and clean and jerk. So if you think about it, a pool of water, it's clear. Every time you do a bad rep, every time you do a bad pull, you're adding a little dye, you're mudding the waters a little bit, and this pool of water that you drink from is getting a little bit worse. So when you're doing your pulls, you need to be making sure that they're the exact same speed, same tempo, or aiming for the same tempo, and the same angles need to be there. And then all I would do is practice them. So, dictate, are you a worse squatter? Do you need more pulling practice, for example? Like at the moment, I would do probably 4 or 5, 3 times as much volume on my snatch pulls compared to my squatting. So I would do probably per session, I might do 5 or 6 reps, 2 or 3 times a week on the squat. Obviously maintains it quite well. but I might do 30 reps in the pull 3 times a week. So we're looking at 90 reps there. So lots of extra technical practice. So if you're a bad puller, if you feel like your pull is weak, if you can't keep your back position, if your bar is slow, it could be the pull. So try and figure out which you are. Front squat, very similar to that loading in regards to the peak. So you want your front squat nice and strong around that clean and jerk peak, but you don't have to be new PB front squat. I'd be worried, for example, if your front squat at your clean and jerk predicted weight is moving slow. You know, if it's like really hard, then I'd be like, oh, okay. But it's going to be too late then, so you need to be predicting that in the future. But if you're going for a peak in your clean and jerk and you're trying to clean and jerk 120 kilos and you move at 140, that's super fast. You don't need to be worried about adding more then, you know. So the front squat is a little bit more technical practice as opposed to pushing it really far. Your back squat will drag up your front squat with it. Your back squat goes up and you're practicing your front squat. There's a great chance your front squat's going to go up with it too. So definitely, we'd usually see a 2-to-1 frequency in terms of back squats to front squats, back squats being more useful, and then the front squat being something that you practice. Now, again, you know, we might see professional weightlifters doing it much more frequently, but for most of you guys, one good quality front squat a week is big. So when we're looking at back squats, we might see some drop in quality, but when we're looking for front squats, we're really looking at good technique, nice positions. It's okay to get a bit grindy at them. It's okay to push them hard at times, but let the back squat do the most leg work and then let the front squat kind of move along. If you're really bad at them, at front squats and clean and jerks, it might be harder for you to get some reasonable loading on your front squat. So, you know, if you do your 5 sets of clean and jerks and you've got 5x3 in front squats after, and if you're really bad at front squats, it could be really hard for you to get effective training in. So then you need to look at, can I put them somewhere else? Can I move them to a different day later in the week maybe, and see if, because you do want to get good quality volume. So obviously you're someone who can clean and jerk. If you're having a hard time front squatting, clean and jerks probably take a lot out of you. So you want to make sure that you're still getting good clean and jerk sessions in, and you're still getting good front squat sessions in. So there we might be looking at, let's say we clean and jerk on a Tuesday, maybe you're going to front squat on the Saturday, the last day of the week, and try and get a good quality, put them first in the session and bring them up a bit, you know. So it's not that you don't want to push the front squats for sure, but we don't want to be putting all our effort in the front squat if our back squat isn't going up.
How important is that heavy single at the end of a peak? So could you do like a heavy double knowing that you could hit that target single without actually doing it? Like if you don't really care about, you know, I'm here to weightlift, I don't care about the squat single. Well, no, other people are different into that.
Yes.
But is it important to do that heavy?
Some people.
To do that heavy single to practice?
Well, as a man who likes squat singles myself, I'd say yes. So no, it's not important to do it, but I haven't met many good weightlifters who weren't really good squatters, you know, and who didn't push it. You will run into trouble eventually, I would say. So you don't necessarily need to do that single. A fast doubles, you know, here or there, it's not going to make any major difference to our power output. It's more, you don't necessarily need to do it, although some coaches might think you do. I think it's more a representation of your current squatting ability. It's to let you know.
Better idea of where actually
Yeah, but you do need to be able to do it, you know, and you won't get there unless you're at some point, get cozy with squats, I would say. Yeah, start to enjoy them. Make them your friend.
I do like squatting. It's just,
doesn't sound like it.
I love squatting.
Yeah. Start to love squats, I would say. Yeah. If your 3 rep max is going up every year, you know, if you're doing 120 this year, next year you're doing 140, and year after you're doing 150, then that would satisfy me. You're like,
triples is like good, like in between.
yeah, for example, Gabriel only did triples in the back squat when he was in best shape. He said he was doing 275 most weeks for triples, and his coach let him go heavier. I assume you're not doing 275 for triples, but that's reasonable. It's an indicator that your leg strength is going up. Now, I will say, people who hate the singles, their squat doesn't progress as much, you know. There's a reason people don't like doing the singles and the squats. And it's not preference when programming, it's because you're not good enough at singles, you know. That's what I would usually see.
Yeah, well, I would say I'm just not good at singles,
Yeah.
I'm really good at eights.
Yeah, 8 is too far away. 3 is like, 8 is too much local muscular endurance, like work capacity. 3s are nice. 5s are okay as long as you're going for those 3s, but 8 is definitely too far away.
What happens if you
get to the ends of the programs and
Yep.
you never feel like you've had enough practice at the heaviest weights.
Yes.
Like you always, and it's my case for a couple of vlogs that I've done,
Yep.
where I get to the heaviest weights and it feels very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it's a skill on its own to get to the heaviest singles.
Yep.
What do you do if you feel like you need more practice? Do you just don't need it? Or?
You can add in a little bit of extra practice in those weeks. So let's say you go from, you've one session before the max out, that's some singles. Maybe you could do 3 or 4 weeks out. You could have one session where you do some extra singles.
One per week.
Yeah, and get a little bit extra practice there. So that's something that will come with time as well.
Yeah.
As kind of you spend more time strength training, but some people do need a little bit of extra. So you can add in maybe 2 or 3 weeks out, but you want to be careful because you don't want to impact the rest of your loading and volume, obviously, and you don't want to do too many singles where you're too fatigued in, so you can't end up maxing. So you can add a little bit extra. Some people do find that issue. The better you get, the less you will have that issue, you know.
I understand all of these are above 90 or 95?
I am, you know, sometimes it's kind of the technique of doing a single. You know, sometimes you're doing a set of 5 and you're like, oh, first rep wasn't great, but it kind of gets better as you go on. So sometimes people have that same issue when they're doing singles. They're kind of like, oh, you're not sitting upright, you're not in the mindset of doing it. So sometimes 80, 85% can even do. I'd probably move them up a little bit, but you need to be conscious enough when your peak is and what you're doing.
How would you recommend doing that every session, like pulls every session? Or is that like a...
It depends on what you need, but you probably should be looking at least one clean deadlift or clean pull a week is fine. Generally, snatch pulls twice a week, including one of them might be a variation of the snatch pull for the most part. So if you're training 4 times a week, you should be able to fit in 3 pulls a week, but 2 could be acceptable as well, especially if you need to squat more.
Okay.
Yep.
This is an unusual problem to have, but I'm really bad at using straps, I think. So I
At
never
the pulls,
use straps.
yeah.
I never use straps on anything that
Yeah.
goes over the head.
Okay.
So if I'm pulling,
Yep.
obviously the straps make it feel
Yeah.
quite different from when I'm
Okay.
under a snatch.
Yep.
Is it worth then never using straps, or am I losing out on the intensity?
You're kind of losing out on the intensity, and your hands care, you know, you're going to tear your hands a lot more.
So it'd be
Definitely use, yeah.
how to learn to use straps.
Fuck
would be
yeah.
the main-
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
be the main thing.
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
Could be remembering wrong,
Yeah.
but because I ran a Sika weightlifting up.
Yeah.
I think you had pulls that were in 4s and
Yep.
5s maybe. So
Yep.
it is acceptable to go higher reps. And
Yeah, you don't want to go super high, but if there's times where you want to do maybe you're doing like 2 snatch pulls plus 2 low hang snatch pulls, for example, or something like that, totally fine. Yeah, you can. That's just a kind of a basic, straightforward way. If you've like no idea what I should do with my pulls, no idea what should I do with them, you can't go wrong with just keeping similar sets and reps to your main exercise and then adding a little bit of weight extra. Or you could even keep the weights the same if you want more practice and more confidence. You can keep the exact same weights because they're, again, primarily for you guys, technical practice. And then there's other areas where you might do really slow eccentrics, you might do sets of 5, and you're doing like 5 seconds down. There's all benefits to those, but if you're unclear where to go, then following the same rep scheme, you can't go too far wrong.
I know someone that's watched a lot of a certain YouTuber
Yeah.
doing a lot of pulls of deficit.
Yeah.
Is there any benefit to doing clean and snatch pulls from deficit?
Not kind, maybe. I wouldn't say never. The thing with
Because it changes your start position a bit. So.
yeah, so for some people it might be really useful, but you change your start position, it's hard to keep your back angle. Like for example, I like deficit stiff-legged deadlifts for some people. Deficit snatch grip, stiff-legged deadlifts, for example, are great. Deficit pulls might be useful in certain circumstances. I wouldn't immediately count them out for sure, but I wouldn't be rushing to do them. You'd want to have a good reason to use them. Yep.
The difference in snatch and clean jerks quite a lot for me.
Okay.
So I find the clean pulls at 100% really slow. And
Yes.
the opposite for snatch.
Okay.
So should I be going a lot over 100% in the snatch pulls and a lot less than 100% in the cleans?
So I wouldn't go too much heavier in your snatch pulls.
Okay.
Maybe like 105 or 110 near the end if you feel comfortable with it and it's still moving fast and it looks the same technically. In terms of the clean, maybe not a lot less. But if they're super slow, Like if it's abysmally slow, like at 135, it shouldn't be moving that slow.
My best clean's 155.
155. Even that, what are you squatting again, do you say?
200.
Yeah, they shouldn't be moving that slow.
Yeah, it feels like without the intent of getting under them, that the
Yeah.
speed drops off in the second pull quite a bit.
That's okay, as long as is it similar positions?
The positions don't change. The positions are good. It's more, yeah, the speed in the second pull, I think.
I wouldn't necessarily go too much lighter, but I probably wouldn't be going heavier.
No, it's
Try to get a bit more practice in with 140, 145. If it's very, very, very slow, start off lighter and build up
Yeah.
in that kind of loading seam or similar and see if you can make them move faster.
okay, makes sense.
When do you use different variants for the pull? And technically, does it matter the difference between doing like, I guess like high pulls, lasher, more lasher style pulls? Like where, like.
Variations will be based on what you're kind of working on, similar to when you might use snatch variations or clean variations. So if you're, for example, if you're a lifter who's always really forward at the knees and you're doing pause snatches, then maybe extra sets of pause pulls would also be very useful there. So then you could throw those into the program.
Okay.
But if you're someone who's a really hard time keeping your lower back position, maybe you might need slow eccentric pulls. You might do a snatch grip deadlift and then a 5-second eccentric on the clean or the snatch and trying to keep that arching position as much as possible. So it kind of depends on your issues and what you're trying to fix.
And then the height of the pull.
So I think panda pulls are always useless. High pulls are very useful sometimes, but you just need to be honest with the positions. So a lot of times you see people do pulls and they'll do a panda pull and they'll get their extension to here and then they'll start pulling under.
Yeah.
Whereas your extension for here, starting on the snatch, needs to be like this and for as long as possible. Lots of you got cues yesterday where it was like pull longer, extend longer. The last thing most people need is getting to here and then trying to pull under, you know. It's reinforcing terrible habits. Whereas a high pull can be really useful if you're someone who doesn't follow through really well, so they can be useful for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to see high pull. I want to see something like this, and that's probably going to be around the sternum.
Yeah.
And you want to see some follow through. And if you're doing high pulls, I don't want to see any of this.
Yeah.
All up here, following through. The bar should keep moving after you finish extending the high pull.
Yeah.
So no bullshit under.
And shrugging with it as well?
Depends, yeah, you can, yeah, for sure. Most,
Arms.
what's that?
Bend arms. Bend.
For you, I wouldn't for you. I'd practice without bending the arms. So if you're doing your clean deadlifts, you focus really on extending your hips and your knees and even your ankles and pulling your traps up. But don't, for you, I wouldn't do pulls with the arms because it's going to reinforce a bit too much. Look, it's not like it's not going to make your back stronger.
Yeah.
But it would be better if you make it stronger in the way you want it to be. Yeah. No, look, if you have a 400 kilo mixed grip deadlift, like, I'd be like, okay, that's going to do. Yeah. You know, no one's going to say you have a weak back then, you know. No one's going to be like, well, if only he did clean grip deadlifts. You know, that's not the case. But for most weightlifters, like, very similar to you, like you could be squatting 200 kilos, but 180 kilo deadlift, they're like, oh, I failed it, you know. So it's half the lift.